The idea that small gains can lead to big growth is often underestimated, but it's one of the most powerful principles in personal development and business success. We live in a world obsessed with overnight success stories and massive transformations, but the truth is, sustainable growth is built on small, intentional steps. That's where the 10% rule becomes a game changer. It's not about doubling your revenue overnight or completely reinventing your leadership style in 1 week. It's about identifying where you are now, getting radically honest about what's working and what isn't, and asking yourself, where can I be just 10% better? Let's talk about performance. Imagine if every member of your team improved their output by just 10%. That's not an overwhelming ask. It's one extra call, one faster turnaround, one better client conversation. It's a slightly sharper meeting agenda, a little more clarity in your emails, or 5 more minutes of preparation before a pitch. That 10% doesn't feel huge when you think about it in isolation, but multiply that across an entire team, across days, weeks, quarters. That's exponential growth. This concept is especially important when you're trying to scale. Scaling doesn't start with $1 million decisions. It starts with discipline. It starts with leaders who aren't afraid to look at the small things. Leaders who know that the way you manage 5 clients is the same way you'll manage 50. If your systems break at 5, they're not going to magically work at scale, so you need to build muscle in the little things. You need to prove to yourself and your team that you can get 10% better at what you already do before you try to do more of it. Most people fail because they ignore the micro moves. They want the big result without the small shift in mindset, in behavior, in habits. But that shift is everything. You can't lead a hyper-forming team if you're not personally growing. You can't demand more if you haven't raised your own standard. The 10% rule brings that focus back to what's in your control. You don't need to reinvent yourself. You just need to level up slightly, consistently, and intentionally. Let's be clear, 10% doesn't mean low effort. It means focused effort. It means identifying the right things and choosing to lean in with more precision, more urgency, more ownership. It's not about doing everything at once. It's about choosing one area, mastering it, and then moving on to the next. That's how real momentum is built. That's how trust is built within your team. You become the person who follows through. You become the person who models discipline, and that influence compounds. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you adopt this mindset. A 10% improvement feels doable, so you're more likely to take action. You stop procrastinating on the big, scary goal, and you start executing on the next small move, and then the next, and then the next. You build momentum by doing, not by planning. You stop waiting for the perfect strategy, or the perfect team member, or the perfect economy. You take what you have and you make it work 10% better than yesterday. This isn't about being average. It's about mastering the fundamentals. You'd be shocked how many businesses stall out not because they lack talent or ideas, but because they ignore the basics. They stop measuring what matters. They tolerate unclear communication. They let average performance slide. But when you hold the line at 10% better every single day, you start seeing problems before they explode. You start noticing patterns. You start making decisions faster. You build an organization that's agile, resilient, and focused on results. The best part, this approach is contagious. When your team sees you pushing for 10% growth, they'll rise to meet it. Culture shifts when leadership shifts. It's not about being perfect, it's about being accountable. It's about being intentional with your time, your energy, your strategy. And it's about knowing that those small gains, repeated daily, will compound into the kind of business and the kind of life you actually want. Big growth isn't a one-time event. It's a byproduct of small wins executed consistently. And the 10% rule isn't just a strategy, it's a standard. We all want to get things right. Whether it's delivering a presentation, launching a product, leading a meeting, or just getting through your to-do list, there's a natural desire to do it perfectly. But perfection is a trap. It slows you down, steals your momentum and convinces you that if you can't do it flawlessly, it's not worth doing at all. That mindset kills progress. In reality, the people who win, who grow their businesses, build strong teams, and hit goals consistently, aren't the ones chasing perfection. They're the ones showing up every single day, doing the work, and making progress even when conditions aren't ideal. That's the power of consistency over perfection. Consistency doesn't mean mediocrity. It means being disciplined enough to keep moving forward, especially when it's uncomfortable. You're not always going to feel motivated. You're not always going to have the perfect plan. Sometimes you're going to feel like you're winging it, but showing up with intention, doing the next right thing, and learning from the process, that's where the results come from. Not from waiting until you're completely ready, not from overthinking the perfect next step, just from being present, being committed, and taking action. In business, the people who are consistent outperform the perfectionists every time. Why? Because they're putting in more reps, they're gaining more experience, they're learning faster, and they're building resilience. When something doesn't go exactly as planned, they don't unravel, they adjust. They try again, they improve, but the perfectionist, they freeze, they overanalyze, they spend so much time refining that they miss opportunities entirely. They think being excellent means waiting until everything is just right. But in fast-moving environments, the right time rarely presents itself. You create the right time by taking action. There's also a huge cost to perfectionism that people don't talk about enough. It's exhausting. It drains your energy, clouds your decision making, and puts an unrealistic standard on your team. If you're constantly chasing perfect, your team will feel it. They'll hesitate, they'll second, guess themselves. They'll play small because they're afraid of failing in front of you. But when you model consistency, when you show that progress matters more than polish, you give them permission to execute, learn, and improve. You create a culture of momentum, not fear. Being consistent builds trust. Your clients trust you because you deliver. Your team trusts you because you're reliable. You trust yourself because you've proven that you don't give up when it's hard. That kind of self-trust is critical. Perfection doesn't build confidence, action does. Confidence is earned by doing things before you feel completely ready, by making decisions even when you're unsure, by keeping promises to yourself over and over again. That's how leaders are built, not by being the smartest in the room, but by being the most consistent in the room. Think about how this plays out over time. If you're 1% better every day, that compounds. It doesn't look like much on day one. It might even feel like a failure compared to what you hoped to do. But over 30, 60, 90 days, that small improvement, repeated consistently, creates massive change. The perfectionist might have the perfect plan sitting in their notebook, but the consistent person has real results because they were willing to execute even when the circumstances weren't perfect. This mindset shift also gives you freedom. You stop attaching your worth to the outcome and start focusing on the process. You stop fearing failure because you understand that missteps are part of growth. You stop needing everything to be perfect because you're playing the long game. And in the long game, what matters most is showing up consistently, intentionally, relentlessly. Your reputation, your leadership, your business, none of it is built in one perfect moment. It's built in the hundreds of imperfect moments where you decided to keep going. When you sent the email even though it wasn't worded exactly right, when you made the pitch even though you were nervous, when you made the hire, ran the meeting, asked for the sale, even if you weren't sure it would land. That's what builds something real. Perfection is fragile. Consistency is powerful. One breaks under pressure. The other builds under pressure. If you want to be the kind of leader who creates results, who grows a team, who scales a business, you don't need to be perfect. You need to be consistent, and that choice is available to you every single day. Scalability sounds exciting. It's the promise of growing your business, reaching more people, increasing revenue, and stepping into the next level of impact. But what most people get wrong is thinking that scaling is about going bigger all at once. They chase massive changes, new software, big hires, bold rebrands. thinking that's what will unlock growth. In reality, true scalability starts with the smallest, most intentional shifts. Micro shifts, the seemingly minor decisions and changes that, when done consistently, create the foundation needed to support larger growth. Before you can scale anything, you need stability, you need structure. And that doesn't come from dramatic overhauls. It comes from tightening up the little things, your communication systems, your calendar discipline, how you lead meetings, how your team sends updates, how you manage deliverables. These aren't flashy, but they're everything. If your business feels chaotic at a small level, it won't suddenly become orderly at a larger level. The gaps get bigger, the pain points multiply. So, if you can't manage the current version of your business efficiently, scaling it will only expose the cracks faster. Scalability is about replaceability. Can the way you do things be duplicated? Can someone step in and follow your process without it breaking down? If your systems rely entirely on you remembering, doing, or fixing things, you're not ready to scale. That's why micro shifts are key. Start by looking at where you're losing time or energy. Are there repeated tasks that could be streamlined or delegated? Is there information your team constantly asks for that could be documented? Is your onboarding experience repeatable? These aren't huge changes, but they're high leverage moves that remove friction and increase capacity. Too many leaders wait for a scaling moment that doesn't exist. They think once they hit a certain revenue number or team size, that's when they'll get organized, that's when they'll create structure. But waiting is what keeps them stuck. The leaders who actually scale well are the ones who treat today like the business they want to build tomorrow. They ask themselves, if I had 10 times the clients I have right now, would this process still work? And if the answer is no, they make a small shift today before they need it. That's proactive leadership. That's thinking like a scalable business owner. It's also about mindset. Scaling isn't just operational, it's personal. You have to start thinking like a leader who's responsible for more. You have to stop being the bottleneck. That means making small but powerful shifts in how you delegate, how you prioritize, how you give feedback. It means moving from doing to directing. That's not always comfortable, especially if you're used to being hands-on, but those small mindset shifts are what allow you to scale your leadership as the business grows. You become the kind of leader who makes space for growth instead of reacting to it in crisis mode. Even your team culture is built through micro shifts. The way you acknowledge wins, the way you respond to mistakes, how consistently you set expectations, all of those moments shape how your team operates. If you want to scale a culture of accountability, it doesn't start with a mission statement. It starts with small daily actions, following up when someone misses a deadline, recognizing someone who overdelivers, making time for feedback. These things may feel minor in the moment, but they create a rhythm, a standard, a culture that scales. Scalability also demands clarity, and clarity comes from simplifying. You don't need more tools, more complexity, more moving parts. You need clean processes, clear expectations, and sharp priorities. That often means cutting what's not working, even if it's familiar, saying no to what doesn't align, even if it once did. These are micro shifts that can feel uncomfortable, but they open the door to sustainable growth. You don't need to be everywhere, you need to be precise. Where is the friction? What's costing you time or energy that doesn't need to? What's being repeated that could be systemized? These questions are how you find the micro shifts. The moments where just a 10% improvement can unlock hours of capacity and make room for more revenue, more clients, more impact, without burning out your team or yourself. Growth doesn't require chaos. It requires alignment, and alignment is built through consistency in the small things. That's the truth most people miss. The business that scales well is the one that paid attention to the details before it had to. It's the one where the leader made the shifts early, quietly, deliberately, and relentlessly. Scalability isn't a future event. It's a decision you make every day, in the way you work, in the way you lead. In the way you think, there's a direct line between how intentional you are and the results you get. It's easy to think you're working hard, putting in hours, staying busy, but busyness doesn't equal effectiveness. When you start approaching your day, your team, and your goals with just 10% more intentionality, everything changes. You communicate more clearly, you make faster decisions, you cut the noise and focus on what actually moves the business forward. That 10% shift in how you think, how you plan, and how you execute creates a ripple effect that leads to massively better outcomes. Intentionality starts with clarity. You need to know what matters most. Not everything is a priority. Not every problem deserves your attention. And if you don't define what success looks like each day, you'll default to reacting. That's where most leaders get stuck. They spend their day putting out fires, bouncing between meetings, checking things off a list, but not actually moving the needle. Adding 10% more intentionality means taking time to zoom out before you dive in. It means asking, what is the most important thing I can do today to drive results? And then protecting that action like it's non-negotiable. The same applies to your team. If you're vague, they'll stay busy but not necessarily effective. If you're clear and intentional with expectations, they'll align faster and perform better. That clarity doesn't happen by accident. It comes from being thoughtful about how you set goals, how you follow up, how you coach. A 10% improvement in how you lead your team, more prep before a one-on-one, tighter agendas in meetings, more direct feedback, can shift the entire dynamic. People crave direction. When you give it with consistency and intention, they rise. Intentionality is also about your energy. You don't have unlimited bandwidth. If you're pouring yourself into things that don't matter, you're robbing your business of your best contribution. When you add 10% more intentionality, you start saying no to the wrong things. You start guarding your time. You don't take every meeting. You don't reply to every email immediately. You stop trying to do everything yourself. Instead, you decide where your presence makes the biggest impact, and you show up fully for those moments. That alone can shift your results dramatically. This shift doesn't have to be overwhelming. Start small. Look at your calendar. Is it aligned with your priorities? Are you spending your time where it matters, or just filling it with noise? Add 10% more thought to how you schedule your week. Build in space to think, not just execute. Create buffers so you're not racing from one thing to the next. That extra margin gives you the clarity to lead with intention instead of reactivity. The beauty of intentionality is that it compounds. When you're 10% more intentional with your goals, you hit targets faster. When you're 10% more intentional with your communication, your team moves with more confidence. When you're 10% more intentional with your focus, your output improves. These aren't huge changes, but they add up, they build momentum, they create a culture where everyone is clear, aligned, and moving with purpose. Even your decision-making benefits from this. So many leaders get stuck in indecision because they haven't taken the time to clarify what matters. They overthink, delay, or crowdsource decisions that could have been made with just a bit more intentional thought. When you commit to being 10% more intentional, you start making decisions faster because you trust your process, you've done the work, you've defined the metrics, you've set the priorities, so you're not guessing, you're executing. And intentionality doesn't kill creativity, it enhances it. When your brain isn't bogged down by clutter, you actually have more space for innovative thinking. When your team isn't wasting time on vague tasks or unclear goals, they show up more engaged and confident. Everyone wins when intentionality is present. The mistake most people make is thinking that being intentional means slowing down, but that's not true. It means choosing speed in the right direction. It means aligning effort with outcomes. It means getting serious about what you want and refusing to waste time on anything that doesn't serve that goal. You don't need to overhaul your business or your life. You don't need to work twice as hard. You just need to work 10% more intentionally. That small shift can create a massive return, because when you start leading with focus, clarity, and purpose, everything else starts to align. Better outcomes aren't an accident. They're a result of better decisions, better priorities, and better habits, and all of that starts with intention. Leadership is not about having all the answers, it's about setting the pace. When you lead a team, people are watching everything: how you show up, how you respond to pressure, how you handle setbacks, how you hold the standard. That's why leading a 10% shift starts with you. It's not about pushing your team harder without changing anything yourself. It's about modeling the behavior you want to see. It's about going first, because if you're not willing to grow, they won't either. The 10% rule isn't about perfection or massive leaps. It's about small, consistent improvements that create real momentum. And when you commit to leading that kind of shift in your team, the impact is exponential. Think about what would happen if every person on your team improved just one thing by 10%. One aspect of their role, one behavior, one habit. That's not a huge ask, but the collective effect, game-changing. The most effective leaders don't wait until something is broken to initiate change. They look ahead. They see where things are starting to drift, where standards are softening, where momentum is slowing, and they course correct early. That's the power of the 10% mindset. You don't need a crisis to get better. You choose better, even when things are working, because you know that growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from being willing to raise the bar consistently. Start by looking at your own performance. Where are you coasting? Where have you settled into routines that no longer challenge you? Leading the 10% shift means raising your self-awareness. It means deciding to be 10% more present in meetings, 10% more structured in your planning, 10% more consistent with your feedback. These are not radical changes, but they create a ripple effect because the team follows your standard, not your words. If you want your team to be more focused, you have to show what focused leadership looks like. That means eliminating distractions, managing your calendar intentionally, and prioritizing time for strategic thinking. If you want your team to communicate better, you have to model clarity and directness. You don't let vague updates slide. You don't avoid hard conversations. You lean in. You lead with precision, because when you do that, you give your team permission to rise. This approach also builds trust. When your team sees that you're not asking for something you're not willing to do yourself, they buy in. They feel safe to stretch. They stop playing small. Why? Because you've shown that growth is part of the culture, not just a slogan. You've shown that improvement is expected, but also supported. That matters, because people don't just want to be pushed. They want to be led. They want to be challenged in a way that feels purposeful. You don't need to make the shift feel overwhelming. In fact, you shouldn't. The beauty of the 10% rule is that it's approachable. You can have honest, productive conversations with your team around it. Where's one area you could improve by just 10% this month? That opens the door to feedback, coaching, and growth. It creates a rhythm of continuous improvement, and it gets people thinking proactively about how they can contribute more. The 10% shift also creates clarity. When everyone on the team is aligned around improvement, you reduce confusion, you stop tolerating mediocrity, you start measuring progress, not just activity. That leads to a higher performing, more accountable culture. And culture isn't built in one big meeting. It's built in how you lead day in and day out. Don't underestimate the compounding effect of these micro shifts. One team member becomes more consistent with follow-ups. Another sharpens their client communication. Someone else starts managing their time more effectively. These changes, though small individually, raise the overall standard, and when that standard rises, results follow. Leading this shift doesn't require a massive initiative or a long-winded strategy deck. It requires a decision, a commitment to doing things just a little bit better every day, to being intentional about growth, to challenging yourself and your team in a way that's sustainable and real. That's how momentum is built. That's how excellence becomes the norm. You don't need to push your team to the edge. You need to invite them into something better. And you do that by leading it, by going first, by being the example. The 10% shift is not just a tactic, it's a mindset, and when you embody it, your team will follow, not because they have to, but because they see what's possible when growth becomes the standard.